Up to the club, and I did a little update on the EV market and where everything was in the U.S. And to say that part of my business is a roller coaster, this is, in my time in business, one of the biggest roller coaster rides of the last decade that I can think of. And a lot of it's good. But here's a quick, I'm going to very quickly try to run through some updates. July 4th, 25, some current EV stuff. There's this picture I took recently. Anyone want to gander at what's different about that picture that you might expect?
Tesla is a charger.
It's my Blazer EV charging at a Tesla charging station. So I'll get into that. So a few years ago I said there was things driving the move towards EVs globally, global regulations around climate change and the idea of moving towards sustainable personal transportation, and then targeted consumer incentives from different governments around the world and industry designed to start changing consumer behavior. And in the US, trickle down from federal to state. And then the third reason was people, as they started getting exposure to EVs, found that they were actually really fun to drive, relaxing to drive, efficient to operate, and in the end, really cost less than one would anticipate. So there were some key challenges. Number one was range limitation. And just a few years ago, the average EV had a max range of about 200 miles on a charge. Today, it's 300 miles on a charge is pretty much the standard for most of the top-selling EVs. Some are longer. The longest range EV is a Lucid Air. It's over 600 miles of range.
Yeah.
It's quite expensive.
You gotta pay $250,000 for your car too.
Paying a lot of money. You could buy 3 or 4 regular EVs for the price of that one. But I will say that on a side note, Chevy makes the Silverado EV, which has a very large battery pack, and the Silverado EV has a range of 492 miles rating. At the end of July, GM had a team of 3 engineers share a Silverado EV in Michigan, and they did basically a controlled test loop drive on one charge. They made it 1,070 miles on one charge. But that's driving between about 30 and 40 miles an hour, pretty steady state, no stops, pretty level ground. So in a lab setting, but the range keeps expanding. There's been a massive expansion of charging stations, which I'll show you later. And from the first modern EVs that started coming out around 2010, Tesla, GM with the Volt, and Nissan had the Leaf. The cost of a battery, a kilowatt of energy in a battery today is about 1/10 of what it was in 2010. So the costs have steadily come down. And then fast charging has become a real reality. And we'll look at that. These were a couple of slides that I just kept in here just to refresh your memory. Back in the late 1800s, the first mode of personal transportation in the US, horseless carriages, were electric. But what happened in the turn of the century in New York City, their municipal vehicles were mostly electric. Today, just from 2021, there was about 15 electric vehicle models available for sale in the US, and this year there's over 100. So the choices are pretty much all mainstream manufacturers have an EV model available. Some of them are branded under their name, and they're produced by other manufacturers. So there were some myths. EVs have limited range. Talked about that. 200 miles was pretty normal a few years ago, and people were worried they couldn't get to where they needed to go. And when they were on their way, it would take them an hour or 2 hours or more to recharge. Today, 300 miles is pretty normal. That means you can drive most places in New England that you would do in a day's drive, you
Just
can
not
do in a charge.
Just not fast.
Charge while you're there or on the way back. Charging times take too long. The fast chargers that have been deployed allow you to recharge in 10 to 20 minutes on a newer EV. Teslas are able to recharge at about 150 to 200 miles of range in about 10 to 15 minutes. Same with GM's new Ultium battery packs. I've recharged. I drive to Vermont quite a bit, and I'll stop in Greenfield, Massachusetts, and I'll pick up like 150 miles of range in about 10 to 12 minutes. And it's super fast, and it's the same. It's not much longer than it would take you to pull up to a gas station, pump gas. EVs are too expensive. As I said, the costs continue to come down. Manufacturing of an EV is much simpler than an internal combustion engine vehicle. There's just a lot less parts in one. But the early technology, as is the case with almost anything, if you think back in your life, anything that you bought the first version of, your first cell phone, your first laptop computer, your first VCR or whatever video recording thing at home was always more expensive, and each successive generation came out usually a little smaller and a little less expensive. Phil?
Has the taking away of the $7,500 credit affected the business, or if not?
That's what I'll hit for in a bit. So EVs aren't environmentally friendly. So here's where I've come down. I understand. I've heard all the myths. I've heard that producing a kilowatt of electricity burns as much petroleum as driving 30 miles in a gas engine vehicle. My fundamental belief is that petroleum is a finite resource. It's in the earth. It was produced in the ice age, and once you extract a barrel of petroleum and use it, it's used. It doesn't come back. It's gone. And despite the fact that we have a drill baby drill mentality, and we have found new ways to extract petroleum from this earth, eventually that's going to run out. I mean, when I was in college in the early 80s, I wrote a paper that there was stories back then that petroleum was a finite resource and it was going to expire by 2010 or 2020. The world was going to end. And that just has kept getting pushed out as we find more sources. I find it interesting that in the world's most educated country, that we've figured out that we have a lot of energy inside the boundaries of the global United States, or the physical United States, and that we have decided we have to get it out as fast as possible. The world is going to end if we don't get it out. Well, if I was smart and I was leading a really educated, advanced society, I'd want to make sure that my resources were protected and they were the last ones on Earth, so that, but that's just the way that we are. So, whereas electricity can be produced with nuclear, it can be produced with wind, solar, and I know we'll get into some of those alternative sustainable energy sources have been under fire recently. The pendulum just keeps swinging more rapidly from one extreme to the other. But electricity can be generated in sustainable ways. And so no one has ever said every person has to drive an EV. No one has ever said that every single vehicle has to be an EV. But the reality is that a much higher percentage of personal transportation could be an EV. And I think the environment would be more sustainable. The grid can't support EVs. I'm going to get into two specific technologies that actually, as critical mass is reached with EVs, there is a lot of reason to think that EVs can support the grid. V to G is vehicle to grid, and V to H is vehicle to home. So there are real stories. I have a friend of mine who lives up in Vermont. We don't have this here in Connecticut, so I'm using this as an example. Earlier this year, they did a big renovation on their home. The Vermont utility company had a program that he could sign up for $60 a month to lease. They would install 2 batteries in his basement next to his utility panel. And for $60 a month, he has those batteries in his basement. They're powered up and energy is stored in them. He has a contract with the Vermont utility company that says, if we reach peak demand and we need more power, you give us permission to draw energy from your batteries in your basement to supplement our grid, and we'll pay you basically retail pricing for that energy. And then after the peak demand drops, we'll replace that electricity back to your batteries, we'll recharge your batteries at wholesale. And so less than 9 months into having these batteries, he now gets a credit on his electric bill every month for more than his lease on the batteries. He's getting back $80 to $100 a month most months for a $60 investment because they use that energy. So it's distributed power. The more power that's out there in batteries, utility companies can draw back. So vehicles that are plugged in with new bi-directional chargers can have that same capability. They can draw energy from a vehicle at peak demand. And if you think about it, most of us are home at night in the evening. We'd have our car plugged in the garage. You could actually be helping your utility company as there's enough more vehicles out there. It'll give more distributed power and reduce that peak demand. So that technology has just really been being deployed in the last 12 to 24 months, and it will only get better. And the reverse V to H, vehicle to home, with a bi-directional charger, you can now, if you have an EV, like our Equinox EV, Blazer EV, and Silverado EV have the capability of bi-directional charging where you can have an extra, besides your charger, you can have an inverter installed, and it can act, your car can act as a generator for your home. So if you don't have a generator, you could think about investing. It's probably about an $8,000 cost to put this whole system in, but it's about the same price as a generator for most people, and it doesn't need annual maintenance. It doesn't need any other oversight. It just happens. So that's a pretty cool technology too. So I threw this slide in here, Business 101. If you think about, no matter if you have a small local business or you're running a big multinational corporation, you know that you're always thinking ahead. What am I going to do to grow my business? What's going to sustain our business? So you're always doing strategy and decision making. And the one thing that helps those processes is knowledge that you're in a consistent, pretty standard operating system of society. Outside factors like interest rates are going to vary and other things, but large capital projects require faith that you've got a runway to earn back the investment you're making. Business forecasts are based on things like economic trends, consumer trends, and tax policy. So I don't know if anyone, knowing that, if you'd like to run a multinational auto company these days, but I would not. I'm just at the receiving end of some of it. So a quick look back, in 2011, the US enacted legislation, the first federal EV legislation that was designed to help motivate consumers to buy EVs. When this came out, I wrote several letters to our elected officials because I didn't think this was well-written legislation. I knew the intent was there, but they said, we're going to provide $7,500 federal tax credit to consumers that purchase EVs, but they limited it to the first 200,000 EVs per manufacturer. And in 2011, there was Tesla, GM, and basically Nissan early stages were the three manufacturers that offered vehicles that could qualify for this. And by 2015 or 16, Tesla and GM had run out of their credits. And at that time, other manufacturers said, oh, they're out, we're going to start building EVs now because they had a competitive advantage because they had this law built in. The law should have said, we're going to provide $7,500 tax credit to the first, whatever they want to say, 500,000 US consumers that purchase an EV, and then it scales down to 5,000 for the next 500,000, and then 2,500. It should have tapered off. And then it would have rewarded manufacturers that came into the market early, and it would have had a natural taper. But sometimes our elected officials don't think ahead. In 2016, Norway was the first country to call for phasing out gas-powered vehicles.
Interesting for a country that gets 99% of its GDP from
Yeah.
pumping oil out of the North Atlantic.
So,
99.5.
in 2016, when President Trump was elected, they phased, they took a lot of the climate initiatives away, and all the manufacturers pulled back from EVs in the US. They sort of kept what was in the market at the time. And then in 2020, new election, literally the switch got flipped, and projects that were put on hold in 2016 and 17 got reactivated in 2020. And in 2022, the Inflation Reduction Act was a broad, sweeping legislation that they replaced the old EV tax credit with a new $7,500 tax credit, which sought to resolve some of the issues, but didn't come close to resolving all of them. They still didn't have any sunset provisions in it. They based this credit on income levels. Before any consumer could have gotten that credit, in 2022, you had to be an individual making $150,000 or less, or a family making $300,000 or less to qualify for this on a purchase. In Fairfield County, because a lot of our consumers are above those thresholds, if you lease an EV, by a backdoor to this law, the leasing companies get access to that $7,500. So leasing EVs is definitely the prevalent, for a variety of reasons. This probably first among them. Second is that it's a good idea to lease technology that has a likelihood of advancing in the next few years. So anyways, that was all in place. And then this summer, July 4th, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act rescinded that entire a good part of that legislation that surrounded EVs and a lot of the sustainable energy initiatives around solar and wind. And on September 30th, the federal $7,500 federal tax credit will go away. It ends, just falls off a cliff. So what we've seen is a surge in interest in EVs since that legislation was signed in July. There's about 30% more EVs sold than in June, and this month I suspect is going to be another 30 to 50% more than it was in July. I mean, we've just seen a real rapid, every single day.
Is there supply? Does Karl Chevrolet have supply?
We do have. Fortunately, we had a really good supply when this started, and we still have some, and we have got more coming, but we're at that. Basically, I know now what we're going to have.
Get your order in
by the end of
this week?
September.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. If you want any choice, and what I'll say is that not all EVs are I would treat equally in this climate. Number one, there's a lot of manufacturers that have come up with EVs as sort of compliance vehicles, and they don't have their heart behind it. And there are a lot of models. Of those 100 EV models sold in the U.S. this year, I'm going to guess that 80 of them are likely not going to be sold in another 2 years in the U.S. because of this legislation. They may come back again in the future, but there are so many manufacturers that are not
viable.
There's no more stick to make them build those, and because they've relaxed. Besides taking the $7,500 away, they've taken away the CAFE, the corporate average fuel economy standards that manufacturers had to reach, and some other things. I think the long-term sustainability of EVs, if you're going to get one, you want to make sure you get it from one of the core manufacturers that's in it and going to stay in it. So this goes away. Right now, that the federal incentives stack with state incentives, and there's a lot of other manufacturers' incentives. I mean, there's a natural real surge around this cliff at the end of September. So it is one of these now or never, now or not in the near future, makes sense to get an EV. One thing that I find fascinating about the bill that was just passed, and really this goes back to all federal legislation, but if you follow the money, clearly with this administration and the thinking that's driving a lot of policy, it's followed money. It's a lot of money based in the petroleum industry. there are some new tax incentives to the petroleum industry included in this one big beautiful bill, or expansions of existing tax policy that benefit those interests, while it takes away money from other industries. So it clearly is it's a statement on, or a philosophy on what is actual fact or fiction, and it's just interesting to follow it all the way through. Beyond the elimination of the $7,500 federal tax credit on individual EVs, they've eliminated the CAFE penalties for manufacturers, which what was happening is every year the corporate average fuel economy of all vehicles that each manufacturer sold in the US, the average fuel economy was on a track to accelerate. I didn't put a graph in here, but each year it was going to climb up to about 35 miles per gallon in 2030. And it's a high bar, but in order to get there, manufacturers have to average in enough zero emissions electric vehicles that get unlimited mileage to help mitigate those challenges. And a little known fact, a lot of you may know this from reading stuff, but Tesla, as an example, and Rivian, any of the pure EV manufacturers have made the vast majority of their profits by selling their carbon credits to other manufacturers, because they don't have any gas engine vehicles to offset for that CAFE requirement. They get a credit for every one of their cars, and they literally were selling them to other manufacturers who would buy them because it was cheaper to buy credits from Tesla than to make a zero emission vehicle themselves. So about 2/3 of Tesla's profits came from selling those credits, and that they no longer will have, after September 30th, that goes away. They don't have that revenue stream. That's one of the reasons Tesla stock has had a lot of downward pressure on it.
What is OBBBA?
One Big Beautiful Bill Act. I got that online. So it's just behind the scenes fascinating stuff. There's a thing called loan program offices that do federal lending to certain industries. They've greatly expanded the loan support for fossil fuel projects, while they've taken away the same interest loans, low interest loans or capital loans to solar and wind projects. There is a huge effort to lease federal lands at way below market rates for drilling and fracking. So when people say they don't want the EV industry or electric industry subsidized, there's a lot of money in different ways that subsidizes the overall economy.
What percentage of your sales now are EV versus not? Personally, across
We
the-
will, we're close to 20%, which is
EV.
twice as much of
As
the
it's
national numbers are, they were running about 8 to 9%, and we think they're gonna probably hit 10% this year, but we'll probably.
Carl's about 20.
20, yeah. So I put up some questions that I think each of us as citizens of the earth could do well to ponder and then think about how it impacts. Will we leave the world a better place than we found it? Will our children enjoy nature, environment, and quality of life as much as we have? Do we believe that petroleum is a finite resource? I mean, I kind of went over that before, but if you do some reading and think about that question, and if you come up with an answer that says yes, which I don't know how you could come up with any other answer, you got to start questioning some of the things that go on. Do we believe that humans and our activities are having any impact on global climate? Or do we just believe that climate ebbs and flows over time and it's nothing to do with anything about climate change? Right or wrong, there's more humans breathing on the earth, so just the natural heat of existence is probably having an impact, but it just seems that a longer term outlook on what we're doing with energy and what we need for day-to-day activities. I mean, the whole this whole move to AI is consuming a vast amount of electricity in the world, which, talk about a drain that people have complained that EVs, that our electric grid cannot sustain EVs. It's, the AI world is crazy.
Yep.
I know my time is up, but real fast, Connecticut, because this surge was happening, by the end of July, they lowered the Connecticut state incentive for EVs from $1,500 to $500, but that's still in play through the end of September. Since 2015, this money came from a bunch of brownfield site recoveries and different environmental recoveries. The state's awarded over $34 million to Connecticut residents. Purchased over 18,000 EVs. Here's a map of Connecticut as of the end of last year, December 24. There's just under 60,000 EVs registered in Connecticut. There's over 3,200 public level 2 chargers and almost 700 superchargers, fast chargers in the state. You can see the map of the charging stations and then the map of EVs per capita. Clearly Fairfield County is by far and away the most dense, Hartford and New Haven next. And then here's a look at charging stations in Connecticut. And you can see beginning around 2021 into 2022, it's literally been a straight line up in terms of the expansion of public charging stations. The blue line is the level 2 chargers like we have here in town behind Town Hall. At Morris Court, they're replacing that one. I have about 6 at our work. There's 4 at the YMCA we helped put in those are level 2 240 volt chargers. An EV can plug into those chargers and get about 25 miles of range per hour of charge. And then the DC fast chargers, these would be Tesla superchargers or DC fast chargers that are 200, they're at least 150 kilowatts up to 400 kilowatts. This is one of those adapters that plugs into any non-Tesla vehicle. This is GM's adapter, but plugs in and then the Tesla charger plugs into the other side, which just makes charging, well, that's one thing Tesla really gave up. I think their largest single biggest competitive advantage was their proprietary charging network. They had at the time over 50% of the fast chargers in the country, but they've now signed with other manufacturers to allow any EVs to use their charging network, and it's definitely having an impact. So post September 30th, I mean, it's sort of a mad dash to the end of September, but EVs are not going to go away. They're definitely here to stay. I think it will be a collective exhalation of breath and energy in October and November. I'll say it may take into the fourth quarter or even into the first quarter of next year. But I think manufacturers are going to slowly figure out, no one's going to want to be the first to decide how to do this. It's going to be more of an industry response. There'll be a combination of probably lowering prices, but in order to lower prices, you need to increase demand. And in order to increase demand, you need to stimulate demand. So they'll probably take some incentives too, but I'm not sure that even doing those things are going to fully replace the $7,500 anytime soon. So,
But if you want to ride one, get in this week.
I've got a red one outside. This is just the B to G, and B to H is probably another topic. And then this was the projection of EV growth through 2030. Expected to be about 32% of the U.S. market by 2030. Pre-July 4th this year, before the One Big Beautiful Bill, it's estimated that the reduction or the removal of the $7,500 it'll temporarily cause this line to drop, and probably they're projecting right now, if it all stays the same through 2030, about 6% fewer, so it get to around 25, 26% of the market.
Leo?
And my time is up.
Thank you, Leo.
I had one last slide on tariffs, but I'm going to say that for another day. So, all right.
On your way out,
Take
Get a
a
sign.
watch the best sign from Gene. Have a good week and a good holiday.